The First Italo-Ethiopian War was fought between Italy and Ethiopia from 1895 to 1896. It originated from a disputed treaty which, the Italians claimed, turned the country into an Italian protectorate. Much to their surprise, they found that Ethiopian ruler Menelik II, rather than opposed by some of his traditional enemies, was supported by them, and so the Italian army, invading Ethiopia from Italian Eritrea in 1893, faced a more united front than they expected. In addition, Ethiopia was supported by Russia with military advisors and the sale of weapons for Ethiopian forces during the war. Full-scale war broke out in 1895, when Ethiopian troops counterattacked Italian positions and besieged the Italian fort of Méaulle, forcing its surrender. Italian defeat came about after the Battle of Adwa, where a massive and well-armed and prepared Ethiopian army delivered the Italians a heavy loss and forced their retreat back into Eritrea. This was not the first African victory over Western colonizers, but it was the first time such a military put a definitive stop to a colonizing nation's efforts. According to one historian, in an age of relentless European expansion, Ethiopia alone had successfully defended its independence. Background: on March 25, 1889, the Shewa ruler Menelik II, having conquered Tigray and Amhara, declared himself Emperor of Ethiopia. Barely a month later, on May 2, he signed the Treaty of Wuchale with the Italians, which apparently gave them control over Eritrea, the Red Sea coast to the northeast of Ethiopia, in return for recognition of Menelik's rule. Menelik II continued the policy of Tewodrosi of integrating Ethiopia. However, the bilingual treaty did not say the same thing in Italian and Amharic. The Italian version did not give the Ethiopians the significant autonomy written into the Amharic translation. The former text established an Italian protectorate over Ethiopia, but the Amharic version merely stated that Menelik could contact foreign powers and conduct foreign affairs through Italy if he so chose. Italian diplomats, however, claimed that the original Amharic text included the clause and Menelik knowingly signed a modified copy of the treaty. Because of the Ethiopian refusal to abide by the Italian version of the treaty and despite economic handicaps at home, the Italian government decided on a military solution to force Ethiopia to abide by the Italian version of the treaty. In doing so, they believed that they could exploit divisions within Ethiopia and rely on tactical and technological superiority to offset any inferiority in numbers. There was a broader European background as well. The Triple Alliance of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy was under some stress, with Italy being courted by England. Two secret Anglo-Italian protocols in 1891 left most of Ethiopia in Italy's sphere of influence. France, one of the members of the opposing Franco-Russian alliance, had its own claims on Eritrea and was bargaining with Italy over giving up those claims in exchange for a more secure position in Tunisia. Meanwhile, Russia was supplying weapons and other aid to Ethiopia. It had been trying to gain a foothold in Ethiopia, and in 1894, after denouncing the Treaty of Wuchale in July, it received an Ethiopian mission in St. Petersburg and sent arms and ammunition to Ethiopia. This support continued after the war ended. Opening phase. In 1893, judging that his power over Ethiopia was secure, Menelik repudiated the treaty. In response, the Italians ramped up the pressure on his domain in a variety of ways, including the annexation of small territories bordering their original claim under the Treaty of Wuchale, and finally culminating with a military campaign and across the Méaulle River into Tigray in December 1894. The Italians expected disaffected potentates like Negus Tekel Haymanot of Gojam, Ras Mengesha Yohannes, and the Sultan of Ossa to join him. Instead, all of the ethnic Tigrayan or Amharic peoples flocked to the Emperor Menelik's side in a display of both nationalism and anti-Italian feeling, while other peoples of dubious loyalty were watched by imperial garrisons. Further, Menelik had spent much of the previous 4 years building up a supply of modern weapons and ammunition, acquired from the French, British, and the Italians themselves, as the European colonial powers sought to keep each other's North African aspirations in check. They also used the Ethiopians as a proxy army against the Sudanese Mahdists. In December 1894, Bartahagos led a rebellion against the Italians in Akelgozai, claiming support of Mengesha units. A General Oreste Baratieri's army under Major Pietro Taselli crushed the rebellion and killed Barta at the Battle of Hulai. The Italian army then occupied the Tigran capital, Adwa. Baratieri suspected that Mengesha would invade Eritrea, and met him at the Battle of Kotit in January 1895. The victorious Italians chased a retreating Mengesha, capturing weapons and important documents proving his complicity with Menelik. The victory in this campaign, along with previous victories against the Sudanese Mahdists, led the Italians to underestimate the difficulties to overcome in a campaign against Menelik. At this point, Emperor Menelik turned to France, offering a treaty of alliance. The French response was to abandon the emperor to secure Italian approval of the Treaty of Bardo, which would secure French control of Tunisia. Virtually alone, on the 17th of September 1895, Emperor Menelik issued a proclamation calling up the men of Shela to join his army at Warilu. As the Italians were poised to enter Ethiopian territory, the Ethiopians underwent mass mobilization all over the country. Helping it was the newly updated imperial fiscal and taxation system. As a result, a hastily mobilized army of 196,000 men, in which more than half were armed with modern rifles, gathered from all parts of Abyssinia, rallied at Addis Ababa in support of the emperor and defense of their country. The unique Eurasian ally of Ethiopia was Russia. The Ethiopian emperor sent his first diplomatic mission to St. Petersburg in 1895. In June 1895, the newspapers in St. Petersburg wrote, along with the expedition, Menelik too sent his diplomatic mission to Russia, including his princes and his bishop. Many citizens of the capital came to meet the train that brought Prince Damto, General Janemia, Prince Beliakio, Bishop of Hera Gabros Avia, and other members of the delegation to St. Petersburg. On the eve of war, an agreement about rendering the military help for Ethiopia was concluded. The next clash came at Ambaralagi on the 7th of December 1895, when Ethiopian soldiers overran the Italian positions dug in on the natural fortress, and forced the Italians to retreat back to Eritrea. The remaining Italian troops under General Giuseppe Arimondi reached the unfinished Italian fort at Méaulle. Arimondi left there a small garrison of approximately 1,150 Askaris and 200 Italians, commanded by Major Giuseppe Galliano, and took the bulk of his troops to Adigrate, where Oreste Baratieri, the Italian commander, was concentrating the Italian army. The first Ethiopian troops reached Méaulle in the following days. Ras Makonnen surrounded the fort at Méaulle on the 18th of December, but the Italian commander adroitly used promises of a negotiated surrender to prevent the Ras from attacking the fort. By the first days of January, Emperor Menelik, accompanied by his queen Techi Betul, had led large forces into Tigray, and besieged the Italians for 16 days, making several unsuccessful attempts to carry the fort by storm, until the Italians surrendered with permission from the Italian headquarters. Menelik allowed them to leave Méaulle with their weapons, and even provided the defeated Italians mules and pack animals to rejoin Baratieri. While some historians read this generous act as a sign that Emperor Menelik still hoped for a peaceful resolution to the war, Harold Marcus points out that this escort allowed him a tactical advantage. Menelik craftily managed to establish himself in Hurrian at Gendapata, near Adwa, where the mountain passes were not guarded by Italian fortifications. Heavily outnumbered, Baratieri refused to engage, knowing that due to their lack of infrastructure, the Ethiopians could not keep large numbers of troops in the field much longer. However, Baratieri also never knew about the true numerical strength of the Ethiopian army that was to face his army, so he rather further fortified his positions in the Tigre. But the Italian government of Francesco Crispi was unable to accept being stymied by non-Europeans. The Prime Minister specifically ordered Baratieri to advance deep into enemy territory and bring about a battle. Battle of Adwa. The decisive battle of the war was the Battle of Adwa on March 1, 1896, which took place in mountainous country north of actual town of Adwa. The Italian army comprised 4 brigades totaling approximately 17,700 men, with 56 artillery pieces. The Ethiopian army comprised several brigades numbering between 73,000 and 120,000 men, with almost 50 artillery pieces. General Baratieri planned to surprise the larger Ethiopian force with an early morning attack, expecting his enemy to be asleep. However, the Ethiopians had risen early for church services and, upon learning of the Italian advance, promptly attacked. The Italian forces were hit by wave after wave of attacks, until Menelik released his reserve of 25,000 men, destroying an Italian brigade. Another brigade was cut off, and destroyed by a cavalry charge. The last 2 brigades were destroyed piecemeal. By noon, the Italian survivors were in full retreat. While Menelik's victory was in a large part due to sheer force of numbers, his troops were well armed because of his careful preparations. The Ethiopian army only had a feudal system of organization, but proved capable of properly executing the strategic plan drawn up in Menelik's headquarters. However, the Ethiopian army also had its problems. The first was the quality of its arms, as the Italian and British colonial authorities could sabotage the transportation of 30,000–60,000 modern Moss and Nagant rifles and Burden rifles from Russia into landlocked Ethiopia. Secondly, the Ethiopian army's feudal organization meant that nearly the entire force was composed of peasant militia. Russian military experts advising Menelik II suggested a full-contact battle with Italians, to neutralize the Italian fire superiority, instead of engaging in a campaign of harassment designed to nullify problems with arms, training, and organization. Some Russian counselors of Menelik II and a team of 50 Russian volunteers participated in the battle, among them Nikolai Leontiev, an officer of the Cuban Cossack army. Russian support for Ethiopia also led to a Russian Red Cross mission, which arrived in Addis Ababa some 3 months after Menelik's Adwa victory. The Italians suffered about 7,000 killed and 1,500 wounded in the battle and subsequent retreat back into Eritrea, with 3,000 taken prisoner. Ethiopian losses have been estimated around 4,000–5,000 killed and 8,000 wounded. In addition, 2,000 Eritrean Askaris were killed or captured. Italian prisoners were treated as well as possible under difficult circumstances, but 800 captured Askaris, regarded as traitors by the Ethiopians, had their right hands and left feet amputated. Outcome and consequences. Menelik retired in good order to his capital, Addis Ababa, and waited for the fallout of the victory to hit Italy. The casualty rate suffered by Italian forces at the Battle of Adwa was greater than any other major European battle of the 19th century. Beyond even the Napoleonic eras Waterloo and Eylau, riots broke out in several Italian cities, and within 2 weeks, The Crispi government collapsed amidst Italian disenchantment with foreign adventures. Menelik secured the Treaty of Addis Ababa in October, which delineated the borders of Eritrea and forced Italy to recognize the independence of Ethiopia. Delegations from the United Kingdom and France, whose colonial possessions lay next to Ethiopia, soon arrived in the Ethiopian capital to negotiate their own treaties with this newly proven power. Gallery. Russian military officer Nikolai Leontiev was a member of the Ethiopian military. Battle of Adwa, an Ethiopian painting commemorating the Battle of Adwa,